I felt the wrongness the first week. I moved to the edge of a quiet neighborhood outside Toronto, a small town tucked between long stretches of forest and narrow roads that curled like they were trying to hide something. I had come here for calm, believing distance from people would steady my life. My name is Mara, and back then I worked as a freelance book repairer, spending most days restoring cracked bindings and faded pages. I wanted a routine, something soft, something predictable. I never expected that predictability to turn into something that watched me back. The house I bought sat beside a larger place, almost a twin, except the one next door had been expanded over the years into something too big for the land around it. The old man who lived there liked to talk. People said the property had belonged to two brothers in the early 1920s, men who built matching homes on land their father left them. But only one house stayed close to its original shape. The other, the one next door, grew taller, wider, heavier, as if something inside it pushed against its walls and demanded more room. The neighbor claimed the sons of that old family were not normal. He shared this with the kind of seriousness that makes your skin tighten. He said the boys were creatures that roamed in forms no one could recognize in daylight. I did not believe a word. Not then, not until things began happening inside my own house that forced me to question everything I thought I understood about safety. The neighbor once invited my husband Leo inside his home and pulled aside the rug in his foyer to show him something. A stone pentagram, dark in color, carved into the slate beneath, 5 feet wide, smooth and permanent. He said the brothers' sons put it there during renovations, a design they insisted on. When Leo told me this later, I laughed at first, thinking it was just an eccentric decoration. But Leo's face did not move when he described it. He said the man was not joking. He said the man spoke like someone repeating a warning. We adopted a rescue dog a few weeks after moving in, a mixed breed with soft fur and gentle eyes. Her name was Talon. She bonded to our daughter right away, calm and steady, until small things began shifting. One night, Talon stood at the top of the stairs with a deep growl vibrating in her chest, staring into darkness like something waited there. I saw nothing. I heard nothing, but she would not stop. She kept growling, low, steady, focused. I tried pulling her away, but she refused to move, planting her paws and staring, as though protecting us from something only she could sense. Then she began avoiding specific rooms, the dining room first. She would freeze at the doorway, pulling back hard on her leash, eyes wide, tail low. Then she started pacing at strange hours, staring at corners, growling at empty space. I thought maybe she needed time to adjust, but her behavior only intensified. She began urinating in the same corner of the living room, over and over, even though she had never done that before. One afternoon, she snapped at me, not a playful nip, a bite strong enough to break skin. I stood frozen, staring at her, not understanding what had changed inside her. With a newborn on the way, fear overwhelmed guilt, and I took her to the shelter. She looked back as they led her away, eyes sad, as if she was leaving us to face something alone. As my pregnancy progressed, sleep became harder. Leo snored loudly, so I took the smaller room for rest. That room overlooked the line of trees behind the house, a thin border where daylight seemed to disappear faster than the rest of the yard. One night, after weeks of unease, something happened that still tightens my chest when I think about it. I woke to the sensation of weight creeping up the bed. Slow, dragging pressure moved over my feet, up my shins, across my thighs. It felt like hands pressing into the blanket, climbing toward me, my body locked. I could not scream. The air around me felt thick and cold. I grabbed the headboard and pulled myself hard against it, shaking the bed so violently that the metal frame slammed into the wall again and again. The noise finally snapped my voice free and I screamed. The pressure vanished instantly, like it had never been there. I crawled out of the room until I collided with Leo in the hallway. I told him it was a nightmare, because I had no words for what it felt like to be touched by something I could not see. After our baby was born, I slept in that same room again for easy nighttime feedings. My mother visited to help, and the house felt warm, quiet, almost peaceful. We spent the evening by the fireplace, talking softly, the baby sleeping soundly nearby. But peace never lasts long in places that hide old things. Sometime before dawn, the baby shrieked. A sound so sharp it sliced through sleep. I tried to move, but cold wrapped around me, stiffening my limbs. The room felt like a freezer, air biting into my skin. The door was open, yet the cold held only inside that space. My mother rushed in and grabbed the baby, stepping back into the hallway where the temperature returned to normal. Leo lifted me out of bed, guiding me across an invisible line at the doorway. The moment my foot crossed it, warmth washed over me again. There was no draft, no broken window, no explanation. Just a room that froze without reason. We should have left right then. But people cling to their plans even when danger whispers through the walls. In those months, I started noticing strange stories around town. A girl rushed through a parking lot one evening, slipping between two men who called her different names, as if each believed she belonged to them. She clung to a waitress inside a diner, trembling, saying he switched my ride, over and over, voice cracking. Another time, a tourist screamed at a cafe after finding an unfamiliar tracking device hidden inside her purse, a small disc she swore she had never seen before. These events were scattered, but they felt connected somehow, threads pulling at the edges of something larger that the town refused to name. Toronto's outskirts seemed calm on the surface, but beneath it was a weight, a presence, something pressing against the corners of daily life like it wanted to step inside the open spaces people tried to ignore. Leo eventually spoke to the neighbor again, telling him about the cold room, the steps on the bed, the strange shifts in the house. The man only nodded, his expression flat, like none of it surprised him. He said the brothers and their father died inside that house in the 1940s, sudden and tragic, a story buried under rumors. He said people believed their spirits still wandered between the two homes, restless and drawn to anyone who stepped into their space. Leo came home pale, quiet, unwilling to repeat more than a few details. I wanted to know more, but some truths feel like doors better left closed. The less I knew, the safer I felt, even if that safety was an illusion. Before we moved, I noticed things escalating again. At night, I heard soft footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door. Not heavy, not light, just steady, patient, like someone waiting for me to rise. Sometimes I heard breathing behind me in the kitchen, a faint sound that vanished when I turned around. The shadows in the hallway seemed deeper, slower to shift when the lights changed. One evening I walked through the living room and felt something brushing past me, a cold trail across my arm that left goosebumps rising in its wake. I stepped back, heart thudding, but the room remained still. The silence felt like held breath, watching. The worst moment came on our final night. I had packed most of the house but chose to sleep in the living room to avoid the cold room entirely. Around 2:17 a.m., a scratching sound began at the front door, slow and dragging. It moved upward, across the wood, then downward again. Talon used to stand at that same door and growl. Now I understood why. I stayed frozen on the couch as the handle twitched, just once, as if tested. Then the scratching stopped. I waited, listening, barely breathing. Minutes passed before heavy steps moved along the porch. Not footsteps exactly, more like a dragging weight shifting across old boards. Then silence. We left early the next morning before sunlight fully touched the yard. As the moving truck pulled away, I looked back one last time. The neighbor stood at his window, watching, expression unreadable. The larger house beside his seemed to lean slightly toward ours, as if disappointed that we had escaped. I never returned. Sometimes I drive near that area for work, passing the edge of the neighborhood, and a chill pricks the back of my neck. Something still lingers there, something old, something waiting. I still hear Talon's growl in my mind, deep and warning. I still feel the cold on my skin, sudden and unnatural. I still sense the weight that crawled over the bed that night, patient and measured. Some houses keep their dead close. Some histories do not fade. And some presences follow you long after you believe you left them behind. We must trust our instincts, because danger often shows itself long before we understand it. Ignoring small signs can lead us into deeper harm than we expect. Protecting our home and family means knowing when to leave a place that no longer feels safe. Some histories cannot be fixed, but we can choose not to let them consume our future. I never liked how silence sounded in the countryside. It felt too wide and too empty, as if anything could be standing just beyond the tree line listening to my breath. When my parents split up and my mom dragged us out to a lonely property somewhere past the quieter edges of Ottawa, I tried to convince myself it was a fresh start, but deep inside I knew something was wrong from the very first day. My name is Rowan, and when this all began I was 13, old enough to understand loneliness but too young to escape it. After the divorce, I lived with my mom, and she had always dreamed of running her own dog rescue, a small shelter where she could raise, train, and rehabilitate abandoned dogs. My dad never wanted that life. He liked cities and noise and the comfort of neighbors whose lights you could see from your window, but my mom loved quiet places where she could hear leaves shifting on their own. The property she found was far from everything. Thick woods curling around the outskirts of a tiny rural pocket outside Ottawa. It sat about 8 kilometers from the nearest store, maybe more from anything that felt like a town, and even the nearest neighbor looked like a shadow behind the evergreens. She was thrilled. I was not. I loved dogs, especially the ones she took in. Skittish rescues with soft eyes and trembling steps, but the isolation felt like stepping into a world that watched you more than you watched it. There was a long dirt road that led to our house, cracked and uneven, stretching between dark spruce trees that seemed too old to still be standing. The house itself was an old ranch-style building. Someone had stretched over the ground like a sleeping animal, one long hallway that connected every room, creaking and bending with each step you took. Only one room had a loft above it, a cramped upper space that felt too quiet for comfort. I lived there for 6 years, depending on rides for everything. I had no car, no bike for most of that time, and no friends close enough to walk to. I spent hours outside helping with the dogs, feeding them, brushing them, teaching them simple commands, but the moment I stepped even a few meters away from all the noise and warmth they brought, the fear started crawling under my ribs again. During daylight, things were tolerable. Sunlight softened everything, even the dark corners of the hallway. But at night, the entire property became different. Shadows felt heavier, the trees seemed thicker, and the air held a strange stillness that made me feel like something out there was waiting for me to step too far away from the house lights. Every night I had to run from one place to another, my heart pounding, my throat dry, my legs stiff with panic. It wasn't the dark itself. I'd grown up around nighttime fields, streetlights, ordinary shadows. This was something else, an instinctual fear, the kind that doesn't need logic because it already knows something is wrong. The worst moments were the winter mornings when I stood at the edge of our property, waiting for the school bus. Ottawa winters are long and brutal, the kind that swallow the sky and make morning feel like midnight. At 6:30 a.m., or 6:30 in the morning as the format goes, I stood in absolute darkness, the field behind me stretching into a line of trees that I could never see past. I kept glancing over my shoulder, trying not to imagine something moving between those trunks. Even the house didn't feel safe. It had too many rooms and too much silence. Mom was always busy, either working or out with the dogs, and I spent entire afternoons alone. Some rooms felt wrong to me, rooms I refused to go into even during the day. I didn't know the house's history, but the people who lived there before us had treated their dogs terribly, locking them in single rooms whenever they left town. Sometimes, when I walked past those rooms, the air felt heavier, as if the walls still remembered something. I switched bedrooms eventually. My first room had low windows that sat right at ground level. Anyone or anything standing outside could look in without effort. My new room had a tiny window high up on the wall, too high for anything short of a tall person to peer through, and that made me feel slightly safer. There were times when I tried to convince myself I was imagining everything, so I forced myself to take walks along the road, trying to prove I wasn't scared of the forest. But one day, a wild deer burst out of nowhere, sprinting across the trail so close that the wind of its movement slapped my face. It frightened both of us so badly that for a second we just stared at each other, both stunned, before it darted into the woods again. Another day, something stranger happened. I was walking the same dirt road when every fiber of my body screamed at me to run. Nothing shifted. No silence fell. No dramatic sign appeared. But something inside me understood danger in a way words couldn't explain. I didn't question it. I just sprinted all the way back home, my lungs burning, my legs numb, and I didn't look back a single time. When I finally moved out at 19, I felt the fear slide off my shoulders like a heavy coat I'd worn for too long. For the first time in years, I could walk at night without glancing behind me, without imagining eyes in the trees. But then my mom told me the things she'd never said. She told me wolves had been seen around the area for months. Real wolves, not coyotes, creeping closer and closer to the fields near our home. She didn't tell me why I lived there because she knew I wouldn't have handled it well. She admitted she'd found deer torn apart in the backfield, wolves dragging them down right where I used to walk alone. And then she told me something that still keeps me awake. One morning, she went outside at about 5:30 in the morning to feed the dogs in their enclosure near the barn. Our property had motion sensor lights, but they were placed far from the porch, meaning she always had to walk through deep darkness before the lights switched on. Our two cats usually followed her out every morning, but that particular day they refused to move past the porch light, their bodies low, their eyes locked on the darkness ahead. That alone should have stopped her, but my mom fears nothing. She stepped into the dark, walking toward the barn, and when she reached the sensor, the lights snapped on. A wolf stood right there, massive and silent, its eyes fixed on her. The moment the light touched it, it bolted, disappearing around the corner of the barn in a blur of shadow and fur. She told me she wasn't entirely sure it was a wolf, but it was big and it was definitely watching something. When she told me this story, my stomach dropped. I kept imagining myself standing alone on those cold winter mornings waiting for the school bus, completely exposed, my breath fogging in the dark, while something watched me from the trees. I hoped the wolves had only shown up after I started using my moped and stopped walking out there in the dark, but hope doesn't erase the fear, because even without wolves, there were other things I felt. Things I didn't talk about at the time, things I tried to forget. One winter evening, I was bringing food to the older dogs, and the wind was howling so loudly I couldn't hear my own footsteps. The rescue dogs that usually barked or whimpered were completely silent, as if something had stolen their voices. I knelt to refill their bowls when I heard a soft crunch behind me, like a single footstep in the snow, slow and deliberate. When I turned around, nothing was there, just the dark yard and the tree line standing still like a wall. But the dogs pressed themselves against the back of their kennels, trembling. There was another night when I saw movement on the road, a girl running barefoot along the highway that cut behind our property. She looked maybe 16, her hair a mess, her breath visible in the freezing air. When she passed under the lone streetlight, she whispered something that carried across the stillness. "Don't let him see me." Then she vanished into the woods, her shadow swallowed whole. I told myself it was imagination, until weeks later the news mentioned a missing teen last seen near that same highway. Then, one afternoon, while walking the forest trail behind our land, I found a small zippered pouch buried under leaves. Inside were several ID cards belonging to different women, all from different towns around Ontario. I dropped it like it burned me. I never told my mom, never told anyone, but I still remember the names. There were other strange things too. One night at a truck stop near the edge of our community, a girl knocked on car windows begging for someone's phone, her voice shaking as she said she needed to call home. But by the time anyone stepped out to help, she was gone. People said she appeared and disappeared for months, asking for help only to vanish into the darkness again. Living out there felt like being caught between the real dangers of nature and the quiet horrors people whispered about when the seasons changed. My mom and I were alone most nights, and the long hallway in the house echoed in ways that felt unnatural. Sometimes I heard soft footsteps near my old bedroom window, too light to be a wolf, too slow to be a deer. More than once I woke to the dogs growling low, their fur raised, all staring at the same corner of the hallway. Sometimes I wondered if the fear had been in me all along, but instincts don't lie, especially when you grow up in the woods. Something watched us out there. Something walked those trails long before the wolves came. Years later, when I think about that house, I don't remember the quiet mornings or the soft dogs that healed under my mom's care. I remember the cold darkness of the yard, the way the trees held their breath, the footsteps I never saw, and the girl whispering, "Don't let him see me," as she ran past the edge of our land. And sometimes at night, when everything is quiet and I feel that familiar pressure in my chest, I wonder if the wolves were the least of our problems. I wonder if something else lived out there, moving between the trees, watching anyone foolish enough to stand alone in the dark. Fear is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the body warning you long before danger shows its face. When we ignore instincts or silence the uneasiness that rises inside us, we open ourselves to threats we cannot see. Trusting your senses, staying aware of your surroundings, and respecting the signals animals give can protect you more than courage alone. The world is not always as empty as it looks, and staying careful is not fear, it is survival.